I am extremely excited for you all to learn more about Tikia, J.A.K, and their book, Life with J.A.K, Living with Albinism. But before we dive into our interview, I thought it was very important for you all to hear from J.A.K himself why this book is important and what he wants people to get out of it.
What's one thing that you want people to get out of your book or learn from your book?
That they can just be themselves and they don't have to matter that they have albinism. Like, you're just like, no, I'm different. Everybody's going to make fun of me. No, that's not going to happen because I've been through this, 3 years, I guess, and nobody made fun of me ever. They just asked me questions like, why is your skin like that? And I'm like, oh, that's because I have albinism. And they're like, why are your eyes wheel? They're like, that's because I have nystagmus. And I was like, they're like, okay. Yeah, but I still have a lot of friends at school, so you don't have anything to worry about.
Honestly, I wish I had that kind of confidence when I was his age. I would not be surprised whatsoever if he started his own podcast in the next few years. Stay tuned to learn more about Tikia's experiences processing a new diagnosis, educating those around her, and writing this incredibly informative book. Welcome back to another episode of Legally Blonde and Blind. I am so excited to have on a very special guest, a published author.
I'm so honored to be on with you, Marissa. This is such a great opportunity. My name is Tikia Kidd, and I live in Illinois. I have 2 children. One has albinism, and his name is J.A.K or Julian. He is 10 years old, and then I have an awesome and beautiful daughter. Her name is Tikia Kidd, and she's 11 years old. She will be 12 in April. And my hobbies are, I'm an educator, so I'm always learning and wanting to do fun things that are new and exciting for us, or just repeating old activities. I also love to read. I roller skate and just enjoy spending time with my family and traveling as often as I can.
We know you're here to talk about your experiences with albinism and what ultimately led you to write your book, Life with J.A.K. So to get started, could you talk to us a bit about that process where you found out about J.A.K's albinism and how you sort of processed that new diagnosis?
Yeah, sure. So he was born October 3rd. In 2011, I had a C-section. My pregnancy was completely normal, as in contrary to my daughter. With my daughter, I was on bed rest. I actually had gone through IVF with her because my husband and I had found it difficult to conceive. With J.A.K, all natural, 10 months into my daughter being born, I found out I was 6 weeks pregnant with him, all natural. So like I said, I worked with him. All of my lab work came back great because, as you know, there's no way to detect albinism through pregnancy. So when my OB pulled him, and as he's passing him to the nurse that cleans the babies off, he said, "Oh, check for albinism." And I'm going like, "What?" And he was crying. He was thriving. He sounded normal. But then after they cleaned him up and I saw him, I was like, oh. And I'm like, wow, he doesn't have much color. And it took me a minute, and I'm like, I don't know what albinism is. And so I thought he looked different, but nonetheless he was healthy. He passed all his APGAR testing, and he was beautiful. And I just kind of was like, all right, I have a healthy boy. And I was like, wow, maybe he's not going to have any color. Albinism, does that mean albino? And I'm processing that as I'm
I
still
can't
in the
imagine
hospital.
that right as you've given birth
Mm-hmm.
and you're trying to process this new term that you probably didn't hear that much about beforehand.
No, absolutely not at all. Like, I was on another talk show, and I even had to say the word phonetically several times before I could even pronounce it, because when he said albinism, I was like, what? What? And so he's like, albinism. And so my OB came to speak with me maybe the next day after I had him. And he's like, yeah, we're going to monitor him because he may have albinism. And that's when I learned how to pronounce the word. And he said, albino, they don't have color. I'm like, oh, okay, I know what that is, and I've seen someone with albinism, but okay. And so with African American babies, we can kind of tell like what their entire, I guess their color, what color they may end up being, because a lot of times we're born with lighter than we actually become, if that makes sense. And you can tell from the ears, like the back of the ears and the knuckles on your skin. And usually that's kind of like the telltale sign of what color you may become. And so I was looking at his knuckles and his ears and no color. And I was like, well, maybe it's gonna come, but I don't know. And then my mom and family were like, well, when you were born, you were, you were this color, and you had blondish, brownish hair, and I was looking at my pictures, and I was like, but I still had a little more color. So I just say, you know what? And I said, I'm not gonna worry about it. He's happy, he's healthy. And what I did notice when we were in the hospital is that when the lights were on, he appeared to be asleep. But then when the lights would go off, he'd open his eyes, and I was thinking he was asleep, but he
that's
wasn't.
really interesting.
It was
I
very
never thought
interesting.
about that.
Absolutely. Like he was very calm, and all the time I would think that he was asleep, and we were talking and laughing in the hospital and just having these normal, new baby kind of moments where we were a little loud, then a little soft, and I'm thinking, okay, he just ate, just nursed him, he's quiet, then I'd say, oh, I don't know what it was, but maybe we closed the shade to the curtains, or I just noticed at night we turn the lights out, or the sun wouldn't be shining near him, and for whatever reason he would open his eyes. And at this moment, I still don't know much about albinism. I didn't know that it affected the vision. So I'm like, oh my goodness, like he just opened his eyes. And so we started playing, like, we turned the light out and turned back on just to see, like, is it coincidental or is it really a reaction? Like, and so it was definitely a reaction. And we mentioned it to his PD because she came to see him as the sun was setting, and she said, oh, he's asleep. And I said, well, I don't know. I said, let's turn the light off and see if his eyes
so you would never know.
You wouldn't. And she said, okay. So she turned the light off, and sure enough, his eyes popped open. And she's like, really? And she didn't really know much about albinism either, but she was more so concerned about his health, and he passed everything like flying colors, the hearing, the vision, the vision, and then like the muscle in his the reflexes and everything, he passed that no problem. And so she says, you know what, the only way to diagnose albinism is when he's about 3 or 4 months, and I'm going to refer you to an optometrist or ophthalmologist, and they'll look at the back of his eyes, and they'll be able to see if there's any color. And if there is color, then we just know that maybe he doesn't have albinism. If there is no color, then you'll have your diagnosis. So fast forward to January, and we take him in, he has his test, and he is diagnosed with albinism. And I will say, like, in the room at that moment, of course, that's not what you want to hear when you're uneducated about it. And at this time, I was not educated. I was just like, oh my goodness, he has albinism. And I noticed that his eyes had nystagmus right away. But I was just like, well, babies are young. They're young at this time. They don't have,
You
much.
sound like my mom. She noticed it right away too.
Yes.
And everyone else was like, oh, it's not a big deal.
Absolutely. Yes. Everyone was like, oh, no, he'll grow out of it. And, it was a little bit of denial in certain people. And so, like I said, I noticed the nystagmus, and then I still was like, well, he's still young. He doesn't have control of all of his muscles yet. And, so I had that. But then when the optometrist said, okay, he does have albinism, we don't see any color on the back of his retina or his iris. And so we were like, okay, he says, but There's an organization called NOAA, the National Organization of Albinism and Hypopigmentation. I'm going to give you the website. You can reach out to them because they have a plethora of information. He says, you know, educate yourself about what it is. And, and he was like, you can come back and see me. So thank God for him giving me that information because the world opened up to me. It was just like, wow, a this isn't a condition to be concerned me for the livelihood of your son. It's just modifications that you're going to have to put in place that's going to make your day to day look a little different from people who can see normally and those who have pigment in their skin. So this isn't the end, this is the beginning. And oh my word, Marissa.
No, I think that's amazing that you had such a good experience with
Yes.
your doctor telling you about NOAA,
Mm-hmm.
for example, giving you those resources. I think that's so important with a new diagnosis,
Yes.
not to catastrophize it, which I think can happen, especially with vision-related diagnoses, but
Yes.
looking at, okay, what are we going to need to do different? How am I going to
Absolutely.
educate myself? How am I going to move forward?
Absolutely.
Another point before we move on, too, is I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to add when I was first born, they thought I had jaundice, so they told my parents to put me in the sun.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
That reminds me of your son not opening his eyes in the light. And
Mm-hmm.
after they got my albinism diagnosis, they felt so bad. They told me that he probably hated it.
Right. And Marissa, that's so funny because that's what happened to my son. I forgot about that. My doctor had me placing him in the sun on his back and his stomach for like maybe 5 minutes each. She said maybe no 3. It was under 5 minutes. I don't remember. It wasn't a considerable amount of time, but she thought, oh, he's probably vitamin D deficient. So put him in the sun. He may have a little jaundice here. And you're right. We were sunbathing him for a while. And I look back and I'm like, oh my word. We should not have been doing that. But
Fortunately, I don't
yes.
remember, so he probably doesn't either.
No, absolutely. He does not remember at all. But I had to, you joggled my brain when you said that. I'm like, that's right. I was moving him to the window, when he was little, had him in this little co-sleeper. And then she told me to take his clothes off. So he had like just a diaper on.
No protection.
Yeah, none.
So after you got this new diagnosis, how did you find yourself explaining it to your close family and friends? Were there any misconceptions about albinism that you encountered?
Um, well, one thing about our culture and our ethnicity, with him having albinism, the lack of pigmentation is kind of speaks for itself. Like, okay, he doesn't have any pigmentation, so we already know that he's different in that way. So explaining it was just trying to get them to understand that his color is never coming in, if that makes sense. Like, I told you we kind of look at the ears and the knuckles, and you say, okay, well, this is what colors he will end up being, and that's not going to happen for him. This is who he is right here and now, and we accept that and we move on. But I did, we all had to educate ourselves around albinism. One thing that helped me was that Noah they were called rapid responders at this time. And so they were just moms or moms of parents who had kids with albinism who would reach out to you as a new mom or newly diagnosed family and take the time to answer your questions and just give you the information, the warm fuzzy feeling of it's going to be okay. What questions do you have in regards to the development in different stages of life, and questions around just your day to day, going out in public, talking with family and friends about what albinism is. And the person I spoke with was Sheila. Adamo. She's very heavily involved in Noah. And oh
Oh, I'm
my
familiar
gosh,
with her.
yes, Sheila called me and we were on the phone for about an hour. My son was 6 months, and I think her son at the time was 12 or something like that. And she was just a plethora of information just from, her son being older and him being a boy, and me having a son, and just kind of walking me through the stages of development and just letting me know that it's okay, and reach out for your educational resources, like when he goes, actually early childhood development, just linking with social service agencies to come out and give him a diagnosis and let them know, or have them look at his vision and how he's moving around in the house. And he passed all of those. Like he never needed any,
Like additional therapies, like occupational
yes,
therapy or physical
absolutely.
therapy.
Thank you. Yes. No, no additional therapies at all. So, but linking up with Noah to be able to help explain to my family, what we needed to know. And once I explained, okay, his skin is going to be like one of the things that we have to protect. And as usually, like for us, we typically only would use sunblock if we were on the beach, but that wasn't even always, it wasn't a regimen. It was like, we as Black people, we typically think that we don't need sunblock, but that's not always the case. But for him, it was the case of, now we have to build sunblock into our shopping list, and wherever he goes,
Need
family members
sunblock.
need, yes, family needs to know, put the sunblock on his face, make sure you get his arms and his neck, and every part of him that's exposed. And then he's gonna need his glasses no matter what. He needs those sunglasses when he goes outside, and he's gonna need this hat. So if you can make sure he has those three things, then he's gonna be just fine, and he'll thrive just like any other normal person, normal boy. But also, there was the low vision, and I think, to be honest, I think about maybe 2 years ago is when I think it kind of set in for even family members that he has low vision, because he was so good at accommodating. Yeah, he was so good. I'm sorry, compensating. He would compensate. And with him being like the youngest, a little boy, and very active, most of the time he was holding someone's hand. Most of the time he was being held, and just kind of oriented without the consciousness of, I'm showing you where to go. But now that he's older and he wants to navigate on his own, you will see him trip over that box. You'll see him miss that incline when you have to step up or step down. Most in one time he ran to a park and he didn't notice that around the edge of the park, or the playground area, to kind of keep the wood chips in. Usually they have like those wooden beams.
Oh
I know what you
no.
mean. I know you know exactly what I mean. And he was running full speed like any normal kid. He totally missed it and he fell. He did not get hurt, but to have the other kids there who saw, he was a little bit embarrassed. But that's when, people notice, like, oh, well, how didn't he see that? Well, that's part of the low vision for him, that he
No, and I
didn't
think
see
it's
that.
hard for young children, especially, to vocalize that they have
Abs-
low vision, because even if they know they have albinism,
mm-hmm.
it's you don't really it doesn't really hit you that your vision's different than others until you get a little older and you start to have
Absolutely.
more of those experiences where you're moving farther and farther away from
Mm-hmm.
mom.
Absolutely. That is so true. And his school experience was the same way. Like, I would go in and kind of explain to the staff and whoever was going to be working with him that, he has low vision, but he is able to move around like any other normal kids. But he just may not see certain things that other children might see right away.
I think people imagine a binary with blindness too, where they think, oh, this person's either completely blind or they're sighted, but really it is a spectrum.
Exactly.
And even within albinism, there's so much variety in the amount of vision people have.
That is so true.
Like
Absolutely.
some people can drive even with the assistance of bioptics, and then there's some people like me who are legally blind. Some people use canes. There's just it really is such a diverse spectrum that I don't think most people consider.
Like as my son is growing, he's 10 now, so we're 10 years in, but I'm learning, like you said, about all the different spectrums of vision and I say low vision with quotes because it's just so diverse. Like you said, there are some that even use seeing dogs and, like you said, canes and things like that. Fortunately, he has actually good vision to be diagnosed with albinism. He sees quite well, but he's still lower than the average.
Yeah, that's what's funny about it. It's like albinism in particular, relative to other vision conditions, is better, right?
Yes, it's
compared
better.
to the general population, it's still pretty bad.
Exactly.
People be like, wait, are you blind? Are you what?
That is, yes, exactly. That is so true.
Leading into that, in terms of that education piece, what ultimately inspired you to write Life with Jack, Living with Albinism?
Well, my inspiration actually came when he was about 2 or 3, and I was looking for books to read to him about him. You know, you can find books about children who are going through so many different challenges or I wouldn't say disabilities, but just different ways of handling life, whether it's autism, whether it's diabetes. There's not a lot of information about albinism. And what I also noticed is that some, just being out in the public, a lot of people would give me the look like they wanted to ask, but they wouldn't say anything. And it could have been just because they didn't want to.
They're nervous about offending you.
Exactly. They didn't want to come off offensive or any things like that. And so even when I saw other people who were African American who had albinism, you know, I would kind of want to have this conversation like, hey, my son has albinism too. Let's have this conversation. And then a lot of people would just like turn their backs and keep walking because I think they weren't ready. Like maybe they weren't at the acceptance level where I was. And then there were families that would talk and we would share information. And so what I found was a lot of his teachers and caregivers, and I wouldn't say caregivers because he never went to school as a baby. Family kept him and he went to school when he was 3. But even his 3-year-old teacher did not know much about albinism at all. And so I would find myself, you know, wanting to drop him off, but feeling like I'm obligated to tell this woman how best to care for my child while I'm away. I didn't want to leave him, just let him loose and say, oh, he's got normal vision, he'll be fine. So I would find myself having maybe a 10-minute conversation. And so I was like, you know what, I should write a book. I should, you know, have a, and then I started thinking like it should be kid friendly. It should be his book. Well, who else to have another character? Like what character to put in a book besides him? So so I started thinking about it, and you know, the pen went to the pad, and I just started writing, thinking about all the books that I've read as an educator, and you know, being a teacher from early childhood because I can teach. I'm a licensed teacher up to 3rd grade, so I have a BA, and I've come in contact with rich literature. And so I started thinking about what are some of the books that resonated with my students, and it was nonfiction. It was those books with real pictures of real images and things that they would see in their environment. Nothing like cartoon or nonfiction as it relates to like conditions or places they've gone. They want to see what it actually looks like.
They want to see real people.
Real people.
And I think that's what's great about the book is that you have a lot of pictures of Jack in it. So it really sends the message that like there's like people with albinism are just regular people. They are living normal lives.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I was little, I only had one book, and now they make me think about it. They were cartoon characters, so I didn't really
Yes.
make that connection that, oh, hey, there are other like albino people out there
Mm-hmm.
besides me.
Mm-hmm.
It almost felt like another universe. So I think that's a
Mm-hmm.
really powerful point that you have there. So what were some of
Yes.
those main messages and ideas that you wanted to send across with the book?
The main message was, you summed it up. There are real people out there who look like me, that are going through their normal daily routines, but I wanted to bring to the forefront that people with albinism aren't so different from you and I, but there are modifications from sunblock to sunglasses to sunscreen, which are like the three major components of those who have albinism, or should I say, three major aspects of the needs. But I also wanted to highlight and celebrate how brilliant and intelligent and beautiful albinism is on anyone who has it. And in the book, there's actually my son with a snake who has albinism. And then just to show that albinism crosses even plant species, animals, and humans. And there, there's this commonality between all three, which is just the pigment. But each one of them can still survive and be just as similar as other plants and other animals and other people. So
It's more of a variation rather than something
yeah,
that's an impediment or a limitation.
absolutely, absolutely. And I wanted to write it where any reader from 0 to 100 could understand it, appreciate it, and then just feel like they've gone through a day in a life of Julian or Jack, and bring and also to have some of the activities that he's currently doing as a young boy, just from gymnastics to climbing trees, playing at the splash pad, and things like that. We can all relate to all of the activities that he normally that he participates in as well.
That's amazing. So after you released this book, how did you use it to inform like people around you, educators, other community members?
So, believe it or not, Marissa, the book was just released November 5th of this year, of 2021. So, it's been out, what, 2 months now? And I've been on your podcast, and then one other video podcast. And I'm currently just trying to get it into libraries and different school districts that are locally. And then I've shared with my family and friends, who have all given positive feedback on this book, and a lot of them, family and friends, said they learned so much from reading the book. And these are people who've known Jack all of their lives, and they have even said this book has really helped them understand more about albinism. And that just warms my heart, because that was my mission. It was just to inform the public at large about albinism, and just celebrate albinism as well. I mean, I really think it should be celebrated.
No, I think it's great that through this book you're celebrating albinism, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
especially in communities of color, right,
Mm-hmm.
they don't look like the same skin color as you, so that can almost be stigmatized, right, if you don't look like the rest of your family. So I think it's really
Absolutely.
important to celebrate the
Mm-hmm.
differences in appearance, and it's something that's beautiful, right? It's not a
Thank
curse.
you.
It's not something you should
Yes,
be ashamed of. It's a part of who you are.
absolutely. And if you don't mind, with our family, we are all, and you'll see in the book, my family, my husband, my daughter, my son, and myself, we're all different shades. None of us have the same shade of skin. And, they say that black and brown people are the color of the rainbow, because we really are. There's so many different shades, just in one particular family. And I think with Julian's albinism and the skin color, the the good thing about it is that none of us, we talk about how Daddy looks has a different shade of color, Corinne, Julian, and myself, and it's great that he knows that he's unique, but it's nothing wrong. It's just accepting it and moving on, you know? So he's not like the only person who looks different, you know?
So how did you encourage some of these like self-advocacy skills in Jack as he started getting older? How did you encourage him to start explaining albinism? Did he become involved in writing the book at all?
No, well, I encouraged him from an early age to be vocal, and I would ask him questions, just because I wanted to know as a mom, and I also wanted to give him the semantics around what he might need as it pertains to albinism. So I would ask him, "Can you see this? Can you see that?" Most of the time, it was really about what he could see, because that's the major part of albinism, that at such a young age he would be able to kind of relay to me. And he spoke very clearly at an early age. Like I was telling someone, I don't ever remember him like going through a babbling stage. He started off with 2 word sentences, and so I could always understand what he said. So I would say, okay, you need your sunblock. And he may repeat, need sunblock. And this is when he was little. And
Aww.
sometimes he would say, I need my glasses, because I was a mom of 2, and my kids are 17 months apart. So life when they were 2 and 3 were extra. That was so busy for me. So sometimes I may, run out and forget something, but he would say, my hat, my glasses, or whatever it was he needed. And so when he went to school, I would tell him, make sure when you go outside, have Miss Sierra, and that was one of his teachers, have Miss Sierra put on your sunblock, remind her. And he was about 3.5, maybe, yeah, about 3.5 at this time, or 4. And she said, Julian reminded me to put on his sunblock. He had a second grade teacher, and it was a male, and he was really into superheroes. And at this time, he's 7. And so I know you said you started to shy away from your tools and things, and so did he. And so he didn't really want to use his tools. And so I spoke with his teacher, and his teacher was like, I have an idea. He's like, I'm going to tell Julian, because he usually plays around with him and he calls him Batman. The teacher would call Julian Batman. And he's like, Batman has a utility belt, right? And he has all his tools. And he's like, man, that's what your tools are. You got all your tools. So, when you need them, you just pull them out. And oh my gosh, he was so enrolled in that. He started telling me, Mom, I've got my tools. My utility belt is all ready for school and things like that. So I just want to tip my hat off to Mr. Packard. That's his name. And that just grew with him. He's in 4th grade now. And what else? What was the second part of that
Oh, I
question?
was asking if he helped with writing the book at all.
No, he didn't help, but he helped steer me, or should I say, guide me to where I am now. Because initially the book was just in paper format. Like I literally wrote it up, excuse me, I typed it up, I inserted pictures into like Google Slides, or at the time it was PowerPoint. And I literally printed the pictures off. I stapled it on the side. And each year I would ask his teachers, is it okay if I come in and read the book? And all of them were like, yes, please come in, because they had no idea about albinism. And they wanted to make sure that they were doing whatever needed to have been done to protect and make him feel like part of the class, as well as educate themselves. So I would literally go in with my book and I would read to his class. I remember leaving my classroom of preschoolers, going over to his class, reading that story, and then I'd go back, and that was like on my lunch break. And I think he was in kindergarten at the time. And I was just like, oh my word, like I need to put this in publication, so
So other people
every
can
class,
use it too.
absolutely. And then now with the push of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it just made sense that this book be in the hands of everyone who reads, from teachers to parents to children. And like I said, that was like the push to to make it, you know, to publicize this book. And I was just like, wow, I never thought I'd be where I am now, but I I'm glad that I'm here, and I'm glad that it's touching the hearts of so many, and that it's appreciated. And then the mission behind the book is coming, like I can see it come to fruition.
I'm sure that's amazing to go from writing it on paper, having the
Yes.
Google Slides, and then now seeing it fully published. It must
Mm-hmm.
be so fulfilling for you to know
It
that not
is.
only are you helping your son and your family, but
Mm-hmm.
you're helping so many other people out there who
Absolutely.
are, a lot of people struggle to find like a concise way to explain what albinism is because
Mm-hmm.
there's so many misconceptions. There's so
Absolutely.
many like gray areas with the condition, and I think in your book you do a great job summing that all up. So we're getting
Oh,
towards the
thank
end of the
you.
episode. I was going to ask you, at this point, feel free to share wherever people can find the book. I know there's ebook formats for
Mm-hmm.
fellow ebook fans like myself,
Mm-hmm.
but then there's also some paperbacks. So could you talk
Yes.
about where people can get the book?
Absolutely. You can find the book on Amazon, and it's Kindle compatible. You can find it on Barnes and Noble, and it's also in paperback, and you can buy it on your Nook. It's also on Amazon now. I found out just this weekend that it's on Amazon. I believe Amazon is paperback only, but it's still there. And I also want to say that the print in the book, the actual paperback, is friendly to those who have albinism or are visually impaired. I was very strategic about the color of the print, the size of the print, because I know that I want my son to be able to read his own book as well as everyone else who has any type of visual impairment. Down the road, I will look into Braille because that's the only thing it's not in Braille right now. But we'll see. We'll see where this is going. So those are the three places that you can find the book. Life
That's
with
great to
Jack.
hear. And is there any, and if people want to connect with you, learn more about you, where can they find you online?
I am at oh gosh, I'm on Instagram, and I'm also on Facebook, and I'm on allauthor.com. All author, that's ALLAUTHOR, and under Tikia Kidd. And I'm also on Twitter under Tikia Kidd.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much
Mm-hmm.
for joining us today. I really
You're
appreciate
welcome.
hearing your about raising a child
Yes.
with albinism and educating others. I think this will be really insightful, especially because I can't really speak to what that experience is like as a person of color. So I think it's great
Mm-hmm.
to shed light on what that's like. Like I was saying, my mom didn't know I had albinism until I was 6 months old because I was just pink.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
there
Mm-hmm.
really is so much variety in like how people find out about albinism and how they share that with others. So thank you again.
Absolutely.
Well, everyone, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I think these conversations between adults with albinism and parents are extremely important so parents can learn more about our perspective and how we view the world as people with low vision. But then at the same time, I think it's important for us to appreciate all the work that our parents have done for us because in most cases, they were our first advocates. Like I was saying in some social media posts about this episode, I was way too busy playing with littlest pet shops as a child to even think about IEPs or 504s or academic accommodations. And my mom really laid the foundation for me to advocate for myself. And based on my conversation with Tikia, I am very confident that she is doing the same thing for Jack. So if you liked today's episode, make sure to subscribe to Legally Blonde and Blind on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you listen to your shows. You can also stay up to date by following my social media pages, Legally Blonde and Blind on Facebook, or at legallybb_ on Instagram. Thank you all for listening, and I hope to see you soon.